Necessary Other, Gender, Power, and Love in Contemporary Relationships, a lecture by Carolyn Stevens. Part 7 of the conference set, Civilization in Transition, Jung's Challenge to Culture in Crisis, presented by the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago in March 1987.
Being a local analyst and a faculty member, her keen insight and multiple talents have not been shunned or disregarded because her classes are popular, her practice is thriving, but there is a tendency to take her for granted. As a friend of hers, one who went through analytic training with her, suffered and complained and gossiped, and now as a colleague, I must confess that I have been guilty of this sin of omission, one which I can now correct publicly. Carolyn's work in the archetypal bases of gender identity and the individuation of relationship, two intimately interrelated ideas, is on the cutting edge of cultural exploration. Perhaps no more fundamental foundation of humanity or culture exists, and therefore no more profound contribution could be made than one in this area. Carolyn has always embodied, as you will see momentarily, a quiet but forceful energy. She influences by not trying to influence. She seeks simply to be heard, leaving the listener to reflect and inevitably to be enriched by her message. Like that of the great stone face or the alchemist's stone, her familiarity to us is the source of our blindness, but our careful attention will be rewarded by the presence of her wisdom. Would you please welcome Dr. Carolyn Stevens.
Thank you. I don't feel much like a stone. It's wonderful to be introduced by a friend.
Lower the microphone.
Is that better? Yes. I'm very grateful to Peter, and I'm grateful to all of you for being here. Our conferences generally aren't much like vaudeville shows or rock concerts. Not much like that. At least we don't imagine the opening acts to be mere warm-ups for the finale. So I'm especially grateful that you were able to hang in there to share this last hour with me. Someone asked me, was I going to be down to earth? I am down to earth, but I will be asking you to think along with me and feel along with me about some very fundamental questions which have been opened by other speakers. Thinking and feeling must come together here because the way we think about ourselves, in particular the assumptions that we have about ourselves as gendered beings, have everything to do with the fulfillment of our individual lives. Moreover, these assumptions, when they go unrecognized and unquestioned, can skew the shape and limit the depth of our relationships with one another. So I'm asking, who do we think we are? What do we know? How free are we to express of love and of power? And who is the necessary other? Monotheistic religions speak of a necessary other. Communion with divine otherness is an ultimate goal of religious practice, the divinity of our faith, the ultimate target of the longing that we feel for completion, salvation, home. We know this other, if we are religious, as the source of our being, the guide to our spiritual growth, the end of our life's journey. We may call this other, if we are Jungians, the self. But there are other tales of a necessary other. You may have heard the old Greek story of the first humans. They were complete. In fact, shaped like circles or globes. And the gods decided to punish some threat to themselves that they felt from such human completeness. So they divided these original humans into two halves, male and female. And ever after, each of us must be constantly searching for our other half, far too busy to trouble the gods, seeking the male or female other who will complement our incompleteness and make us whole. Now, I'm not sure how you feel about this story, but there's no doubt it's a theme that underlies much of our feeling about male-female relationships and much of our psychological theorizing. These two visions of a necessary other, which we might call the religious and the romantic, come together in Jungian theory in the image of the self as androgynous and of the necessity on the path of individuation to discover and form a relationship with that contrasexual other within, the anima or the animus. In Jungian thought, the anima and animus appear in a dual role. We recognize them in dreams and in our projections, negatively as threats or positively as guides, luring us, driving us, supporting us, as we are drawn toward the deeper reality of the self. Less consciously, perhaps, we may also feel the contrasexual other as the goal, the other half of our wholeness, the prize who awaits us at the end of our fairy tale journey. Let's look at this second romantic vision of the other a little further. Because they constitute the most fundamental division of humanity into kinds, the two sexes have served as convenient images for every sort of two-ness, every polarity we conceive or encounter, including body and mind, heaven and earth, down and up, light and dark, good and bad. We have a tendency to sort all human capacities into the two great categories, and this is only slightly more sophisticated, I think, when the categories are named masculine and feminine rather than male and female. That is, we tend, more or less unconsciously, to assume, for instance, that if it is masculine to be logical or assertive or creative, it cannot be feminine. And if it is feminine to be nurturing or gentle or unassuming, it certainly can't be masculine. We reify our gender categories and, like good Aristotelians, treat them as mutually exclusive. And we have a certain anxiety about displaying ourselves and encouraging our children to display the qualities appropriate to our sex and gender. We feel required to prove our gender by performance rather than to discover its authentic archetypal range. And what is inappropriate to this performance is left not only to shadow, but also to anima animus. In these circumstances, it's no wonder that we've come to imagine the self as androgynous, and to feel that the contrasexual other, the anima animus within, or the mate we seek in the outer world, is the necessary other, making possible the experience of wholeness to which we're so deeply drawn. But note, Plato's image, the image of androgynous wholeness, supposes two equal halves. The king and the queen, in alchemical imagery, are equal in value, equal in power, equal in authority. But the actuality in contemporary personal psychology and in our culture is otherwise. In fact, we do not ordinarily experience the equality, I don't mean sameness, which would result in true conjunctio, true meeting. We have rather only the possibility of unbalanced conjunctio. That's James Hillman's term. An unbalanced conjunctio, which is in fact more in the nature of merger than meeting. The subsumption of one power, generally the feminine, within the other, the masculine. Now, two of the many capacities which we feel as polarities are quite fundamental to human nature and well-being. And our binary thinking has inclined us to divide these also between the genders. These two are love and power, or as some psychologists have rather unpoetically named them, affiliation and instrumentality. We experience love, eros, the concern for relationship, as belonging to the feminine, and the capacity to create, assert, command as belonging naturally to the masculine. And although eros is undoubtedly a great and ancient power, we have given authority to the power of logos, and traditionally assigned that as well to the masculine. As we shall consider it in a moment, this power, the power to name and define, to assign meaning and value, is the most fundamental and subtly coercive power of all. It creates the terms and conditions in which the power of human love may be expressed, in which the longing for relationship may be satisfied. I'm going to suggest that this lingering imbalance of authority, the preeminence of a masculine logos, prevents us from fulfilling the seeming promise of alchemical imagery, from experiencing the transformative power of true conjunctio. Now, before we go on, I want to add some perspective on the matter of gender and some additional words on Western patriarchy, the mental, emotional, and spiritual space in which our search for the necessary other proceeds. When we examine our lives, we discover the shifting creation of influences from three sources. Our experience in the family of our origin is one such source, the object of investigation and reflection by Freud and a variety of developmental psychologists who have come after him. That experience, however, the experience in the family, is permeated by the influence of the second realm, with the understandings and expectations of the culture, of the collective consciousness. Social scientists of various persuasions have studied extensively the impact upon individual and family life of their social cultural contexts. The third source of our life is in the Jungian view, the most significant of all. This is the transpersonal, transcultural realm, which Jung called the collective unconscious, the realm of archetypes. It is from this latter realm that we derive our specific personal potential, and it is also the realm of divinity, the source of the images of ordering power which we honor in myth and religion and embody in our institutions. The archetypal realm is the realm of possibility. And in times like our own, times of accelerating personal and cultural change, we are forced to return to this realm, to this well, for guidance and refreshment. Now we can notice the forming influence from these three realms in our concept and experience of gender. This one concept has been used to refer to a central human reality, which is in fact a compound of influences from the three realms of family, culture, and archetype. Gender persona comprises the appearance and behavior approved for one sex by the collective. Excuse me. Yes, they told me there'd be some water here. Like professional persona, gender persona is an acquisition, the consequence of learning and shaping which we undergo in order to secure credibility and social acceptance. In effect, it constitutes a selection, emphasis, and refinement of certain of our archetypally provided potentials. Built upon and derives much of its power from the fundamental importance of gender identity. Gender identity is at once more fundamental and less specific than gender persona. It is in part the result of parental attribution, blue booties for the boy and pink for the girl. But I think more fundamentally, gender identity is a simple and early recognition, an awareness that one is in body, fundamentally, undeniably, male or female, and therefore like or unlike mother. It's this early experience of likeness or unlikeness to mother that sets the terms of the struggle for personal identity. And it is in this early experience that the characteristic concern of women for relationship and of men for distance and the discrimination of difference develops. You may notice that I'm attributing these differences to developmental experience, not to archetypal differences between the masculine and the feminine. Sociology, anthropology, developmental psychology have examined very closely the forces at work in the formation of gender persona and gender identity. Jungian psychology uniquely offers the possibility of a recognition of the third source of gender potential. I propose a recognition of that source in the gendered self as the archetypal force which most fundamentally affects the experience of personal identity. A recognition of the gendered self is, I believe, essential to an adequate understanding of the process of individuation, is in fact a most powerful aspect of the process itself. It's here that my difference with classical Jungian thought, though not necessarily with Jung, appears. As I've come to see it, the weakness in our thought about gender is that it does not discriminate among gender persona, gender identity, and the gendered self. As we grow up, the relatively open-ended possibilities of gender identity are likely to be foreclosed. We identify, if we can, more and more fully with gender persona. Gender identity, gender persona become as one. And this oneness of identity and persona is preserved in the Jungian view that the significance of gender identity is centered in the consciousness of the person, to be developed and lived out in the first half of life, while wholeness eventually requires the development of that contrasexual potential resident in the unconscious. That is, as I've indicated, in this view, the self, as in Plato's story, is fundamentally androgynous, and each of us is compounded of both genders. In what degree of each and in what relation, creative, cooperative, merely combative, is to be discovered and improved in the process of individuation. And indeed, if gender is considered to be objectively real, not merely a social construction, and if cultural definitions are taken as archetypal givens, to affirm androgyny is in fact to affirm full human potential in each of us, and the contrasexual other becomes in effect the necessary other. And in this way, I believe we unintentionally blur the very essential distinction between anima animus and the self. This is especially a danger for women, for reasons that I hope will become clear as I go on. You know, in spite of our allegiance to the idea of androgyny, the tendency persists, even among Jungians, to confuse gender with sex. And the prescriptions for appropriate gender behavior, appropriate gender attitudes and capacities, the definitions of gender identity tend to reappear. As Jung himself observed, if one lives out the opposite sex in oneself, one is living in one's own background, and one's real individuality suffers. In her excellent work, Marion Woodman, too, has expressed a concern for gender identity. She has noted that a woman's masculinity may burn out her femininity. And in Addiction to Perfection, Marion identifies power with masculinity, love with femininity. She is careful to assert the distinction between sex and gender, which is essential to the belief in androgyny. But she also presents Lady Macbeth as her example of a woman who sacrificed the feminine principle of love to power concerns, which were alien to her feminine identity, and thereby brought down ruin on herself and on her husband. So, you see, we have an apparent paradox. And this, I think, has something to do with the awkwardness that the Ulanoffs noted about the theory of animus. A paradox in that, on the one hand, we urge individuation, the development of both masculine and feminine qualities, the discovery of an androgynous self, and on the other hand, we continue to urge the basic importance of gender identity. Now, this is a paradox, like many, which has been fruitful. It has, I think, served a purpose which is more to be valued than logical consistency, because it has permitted us to retain an awareness of the importance both of individuation and of gender identity. However, the separation of gender from sex is a move which often stumbles against deep convictions as to the real identity, the real goals, the true nature and appropriate behavior of women, feminine, and of men, masculine. I'd like to suggest that gender identity is, in fact, fundamental in a way which transcends conscious ego adaptations or social teaching, that it is grounded, in fact, in the archetypal realm where psyche and soma arise together. Human identity is embodied, and the attempt to divide psychological gender from physical sex does violence to both. I'm proposing that a person's self-identification with masculine or feminine gender is fundamental, both to personal identity and to its flowering in the individuation process. We're never at home in a two-sex species without a gender identity. But we're never at home in a gender identity unless it makes room for all our capacities, all our inclinations. If we believe that certain of our qualities are innately or archetypally contrasexual, we can never really claim them comfortably, nor deploy them consistently, gracefully, without accumulating stress. I'm suggesting that androgyny is indeed an important image of wholeness, of the reconciliation of all opposites, as Jung pointed out. But it is not a literal description of human individuality. We are too concrete with the image, too abstract with ourselves, when we imagine this symbolic appearance to apply literally to the individual psychological wholeness of a woman or a man. Indeed, much of what has been called the imposter phenomenon in high-achieving women is due simply to this. This woman, constantly striving for perfection, fearing to be found out, to be discovered inadequate, incapable, suffers simply from a feeling that her identity as a woman, which is evident and undeniable, can't include the abilities that she's deploying in school or on the job. Her identity as capable, therefore, requires constantly renewed validation, and no validation of her abilities on the job goes deep enough to validate and support her womanhood. The phenomenon of the superwoman, the busy professional striving also to demonstrate her excellence in traditional womanly ways, is another testimony to the fundamental importance of gender identity and of its vulnerability to the demands of gender persona. It's so important that if our only source of gender identity lies in our awareness of gender persona, we may sacrifice legitimate abilities and inclinations in order to feel validated as a woman or as a man. And we may resist the expression of those qualities by others. Concern for the security of their masculine gender identity seems to motivate much of the resistance by men to the entry of women into previously male precincts, the clubs, jobs, fields of study, which had been havens for male bonding and the expression of masculine perceptions and abilities. This is not a trivial concern. There's a book by a man named Anthony Astrakhan, Astrakhan, called How Men Feel, which I think is an excellent survey of this concern. On the other hand, if our awareness of authentic qualities of heart or mind is sufficiently powerful, we may be driven to sacrifice our allegiance to gender in order to preserve and develop those capacities. The cost here can be just as high. For the woman divided from the mothers, the man divided from the fathers, lose much of their energy in self-doubt and confusion and rebellion. Generativity is crippled, intimacy made difficult. Divided from self, we cannot truly meet another. Now then, if you're with me so far, if I've been clear enough, if you're willing to consider a deep importance in gender identity and the confining power of gender persona, where can we turn? Where will we find the authority to begin to discover ourselves fully, define ourselves adequately as gendered beings? For this Jungian, the answer is clear and contained already in the terms of our theory, needing only the recognition that the self which guides and empowers each of us appears most often in gendered images. In the gendered images of creative power and authority appearing in religion, myth, fairy tale, and in the dreams of contemporary men and women. To speak, as some want to do, of masculine or feminine aspects of the self is, I think, to risk obscuring what Jung called the self's quality of definiteness and even of uniqueness, as this quality affects individuation. Moreover, we're not sufficiently challenged by this usage to question the limitation of our culture's understanding of masculinity and femininity. It is the gendered self, the source of a fully realized gender identity, which is, I believe, the truly necessary other. I'm going to add a few words about the self. This is a concept which, of course, you're all familiar with, have heard of a lot, but it remains a kind of difficult one. The self, as Jungians conceive it, is the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. This self, which is usually written with a capital S to distinguish it from the merely personal and immediate sense of self, both guides and empowers the unfolding of the personality. It is a term Jung thought, it's a quote, definite enough to convey the essence of human wholeness, and on the other hand, indefinite enough to express the indeterminable nature of this wholeness. Jung's use of the term, moreover, does not discriminate between the personal and the transpersonal. Marie-Louise von Franz noted this paradox. The self, she said, is at once the most intimate and the most individual, and at the same time a mirror of total reality, a God image. Self-realization, said Jung, quote, amounts to God's incarnation. In Jung's view, the self cannot be distinguished from an archetypal God image. But the symbols of the self, he said, arise in the depths of the body, and they express its materiality every bit as much as the structure of the perceiving consciousness. Now we know that human materiality is sexed, down to the level of the individual cell and the hormonal compounds which predominate in a female or male body. These, I believe, are the physiological means by which a pre-gender energy is given its special human form in our world. And this, I suggest, is the level of organization at which the gendered image of the self arises. Finding its way to consciousness, this image may inspire our awe and love. As the playwright observed, Saki Shangi, I found God in myself, and I loved her. I loved her fiercely. Such an image may also become the basis of a religion, of ordering preconceptions and the institutions based upon them. That is, Western patriarchy has been, under God the Father, one attempt to express and elaborate the archetypal reality of male mind-body on a societal scale. Harmony attained, appropriate choices ensured, development empowered by the predominance of the masculine. The high gods and goddesses of a culture display in their attributes and activities a dominant image of creation, of good and evil, and of the possible and appropriate behavior of human beings. In all such personifications of the divine, the attributes of gender are also displayed, and in them a culture understands the characteristics of human femininity and masculinity. We identify ourselves in the deities and in relation to the deities. Thus, the image of deity, which works in us for the most part unexamined, is heavy with consequences for our psychological and social well-being, is, as Jung had it, the overwhelming psychic factor. In our culture, the central archetype, the God image, has been a creator sky god. In Christianity, a father incarnate through his son, the Logos, and the psychic and social harmony attained, where it has prevailed, has been at the cost of human possibilities not adequately represented under the aegis of an omniscient, omnipotent, sky-dwelling Father Creator. All that does not appear in such an image, the round of earthly life and death, the ambiguities of subjective understanding, the patient necessities, and the passionate joys and desolations of physical and emotional intimacy. All these have been imagined as belonging to the realm of the feminine. Moreover, the acknowledgement of weakness, uncertainty, dependent need has been allowed in women, decried in men as feminine inadequacy. As Jung observed, the ideal image of man as he should be is inwardly compensated by an image of feminine weakness. Now, you'll note that this very much ties the image of the contrasexual other, the anima or animus, to cultural experience, makes it a compensation for the ideal image of man or woman as he or she should be. I'm not, of course, the first to observe that this way of imagining gender deprives men of their earth and women of their spiritual potential. Theologically, we are not all deists. Imaginally, however, the God most present in the collective limits or empowers us all, according to the degree we are able to feel in ourselves God's incarnation. Now, This containment that I've been speaking of the powers and the perceptions of one gender within another's, may be precisely what made the emergence of patriarchy and of patriarchal religion an evolutionary necessity. When men like Erich Neumann speak of the goddess, they make repeated note of the position of the engendering male principle in the feminine. A masculine procreative principle, he says, that remains subordinated to the feminine in which it operates. This fundamental constellation forms the basis of the relation between the great mother and the son lover, close quote. Now, there's no freedom for the masculine in such a situation. He serves the mother and, of course, the human race in the process, but he is reduced to his function as fecundator. He must be forever young, dying, reborn. There's no growing into the conscious power and wisdom of independent maturity. He does not exist in his own right, is not the agent of his destiny. He is dependent upon the feminine for his identity. This is Neumann again, masculinity remains estranged from him and not properly his own. The reverse is true for the woman in patriarchy, for a femininity which is contained and defined by the masculine. And we have reached a moment in the evolution of the human psyche when that feminine estrangement from self is more and more apparent, less and less endurable. The challenge that we face is that the re-emergence of feminine self-recognition and self-determination must succeed without denying or subsuming those possibilities so hard won by men. The realization of true meeting between whole men and whole women, the possibility of a balanced conjunctio, the consequent release of transformative power for our lives and our culture depend upon our ability to meet this challenge. But to understand our psychological situations as we face this challenge, to understand our situation as contemporary men and women and our struggle to remake relationship, we do have to recognize the pervasive power of patriarchal structures of thought and meaning. For most of us, these internalized structures are simply a given, the inherited house we live in, intellectually and emotionally. We may not recognize it as the Father's house, but if we do, we may, with Erich Neumann, value it as the support and shelter of a higher form of masculine consciousness. Still, it is a particular kind of space, a triangle of hierarchically arranged possibilities and relationships, with God the Father at the apex and descending orders of male authority beneath him. You know, we're not so far removed from a time when all authority, both religious and secular, was overtly stated to derive its legitimacy from God the Father. As kings in the time of the goddess stated their special relationship with her. That sense of legitimation of power and authority by the Father, which is essential in the formation of strong male identity and the development of male psychological maturity, continues to inform our social and cultural space and to be internalized as the real world by both women and men. It has been, as the old saying recognized, a man's world, more fundamentally, subtly, pervasively, than appears simply in the political or economic arrangements of our society. In the intellectual, emotional, and spiritual space, which is Western patriarchal culture, as appropriately in masculine psyche, the arrangements which are made, the values which are served, and the beliefs which are held have been those which mirror and enhance the development of a certain kind of male identity, support male enterprise, encourage male creativity. In such a space, there are inevitably, it's not a plot, inevitably, only certain slots for the feminine. And these are traditionally just those which support and nourish male identity, enterprise, creativity. Mother, wife, daughter, nurse, muse, mistress, cheerleader. Masculine persona permits of rather more possibilities than these, but there are varieties and aspects of masculinity which do not fit the dominant model, and these are relegated to shadow along with much of the feminine. Robert Bly, our own Robert Moore, Arthur Coleman, whom most of you heard this morning, Eugene Monach in a new release called Commandingly La Phallus, are men who are currently urging the recognition of these banished masculine potentials and of their archetypal sources. Still, although the room at the top is limited for men, the idea of masculine power and masculine authority illumines the whole structure. Yet, it is above all the recognition of the primary power and authority of the self which is required for movement toward individuation. In the Father's house, it is very hard for women to find such an authority in their own souls, or to feel feminine if they do. And it's very hard for men to allow it in women. All of us, both men and women, are likely to feel homeless if we do not fit in the Father's house. Some of us must choose shelter there over authenticity, over the full realization of masculine or feminine selfhood. In doing so, however, we may fall ill, physically or emotionally. For a most fundamental human need is for the experience of a space in which our creative energy can manifest undistorted. Creation myths tell us of the gods at work in the manifestation of their energies, as psychological theory tells us of our human projections of inner reality into the world around us. As infants, we require more of our parents than nourishment and security. We require not only to be loved, but to feel our great idealizing love received. And we also require adequate recognition and encouragement of our growing capacities for independent exploration, perception, expression. As those capacities mature, we seek their confirmation from a widening world, and to the degree that we do not receive it, we suffer. To be sure, a degree of such suffering is necessary to the establishment of a conscious ego, consciously striving to make its world, conscious of itself, striving. Too much frustration, however, cripples the emerging selfhood, defeats it. That is, our creations, our projections must take place in a space which sufficiently enables us, makes room, gives comfort, confirms our vision, and supports the enactment of our potential, the manifestation of our energies. Virginia Woolf's urging that creative work requires possession of a room of one's own is a recognition of the need we all have for such a psychic space. So again, to the crucial matters of love and power, eros and logos, affiliation and instrumentality. We humans are caught in a struggle between two great demands, two forces equally crucial to life and its fruition on earth and in each of us. The tension of that struggle is such that we have tried to relieve it by assigning the fulfillment of one demand to the masculine, the other to the feminine. Yet the path of individuation requires that each of us recognize and honor both requirements. We must be one in ourselves, virgins both male and female in the oldest sense of the word, belonging to no one, beholden only to our gods. We must have boundaries that are strong and sacred, and gates to our inner sancta that only we can open. We must be able to say no, and to be at ease and productive in the space behind that no. It is in this space, I think, that logos is born. The word which discriminates and names and gives meaning, and so doing creates a world. It is no wonder that we have imagined creation of all the worlds to have proceeded from the word. It is a theme repeated in Indian mythology, where Kali, the mother of forms and of time, is said to have created language, and then all forms of life through her naming. We humans, of course, receive words and meanings almost with our mother's milk. But it is our task, having received them, to digest them, to assimilate what is wholesome, to transform them into something uniquely our own, and then to transmit our vision, our meaning, to others. This is most fundamentally the owning and expression of personal power. Now, if in the name of security or harmony, we then insist that our own vision, our unitary vision, be accepted by others as the one right way to imagine the world, we become totalitarians of the heart and mind, and we are on our way to overt domestic and political oppression and tyranny. Then we have the expression of power without eros. But every creative person, potentially each of us, knows that the work is not complete until it is received, until it is heard, seen, acknowledged by others, until others have given a reply. To express our meaning to others who will hear and in their turn reply is to enter into dialogue, the fundamental meeting. And it is the great and holy energy of eros which compels us to this giving and receiving. Eros longs for the conjunctio. Undifferentiated, unconscious eros compels to any meeting, any seeming of encounter, any currency of exchange acceptable to or available from the other. And the eros of both women and men has remained in large part undifferentiated and unconscious because it has not been allowed a whole and authentic expression. Feminine eros has been approved if it is sacrificial. The nun, the suicidal poet, Marilyn Monroe, approved if it is coy or hidden and unknowing, the child, the shy maiden, the veiled bride, approved if it is generous and undemanding, the motherly wife, the golden-hearted whore. But this is not feminine eros. This is all too often eros captive, fearful, restrained, repressed. Feminine eros may remain eros unaware, in flight, or in hiding because the active, creative eros, which women would also authentically express, is named masculine or treated as simply wrong, unladylike, dangerous to themselves or to men. Feminine eros has had to make do with too much seeming, and it remains insatiable, starving. Too often dies young. But eros is not merely or solely aggressive, whether it's masculine or feminine. The retiring, hesitant, elusive leading on, which is the traditional role of the woman and of the anima, is half the dance of Eros, and it is as authentically masculine as it is feminine, is as essential to the fullness of a man's experience and expression as it is to a woman's. Indeed, a man is no more eager for rape than is a woman. He must be allowed respect for his timing, must be allowed to hesitate. He will appear desirous after an absence. It may be noted that the motif of absence and return is prominent in myths of male gods and heroes and in the lives of men. True to our stereotypes of masculinity, we focus on the epiphany, the phallus erect, forgetting the god's withdrawal and the action of the goddess or the maenads in calling forth his reappearance. The principle of active love is balanced by quiescence, hiddenness, distance. Eros encompasses both these aspects, transcends and illumines both the masculine and the feminine, requires of both the masculine and the feminine a full enactment. There is a wonderful image of balanced conjunctio between the masculine and the feminine in tantric literature. Here, Shakti and Shiva, the goddess and the god, are represented in an unending dialogue, each alternately teaching and asking questions of the other. It is through this dialogue that the essence of the divine is revealed. Each makes space for, listens to, the speech of the other, and the contribution of each builds upon the contribution of the other to reveal wisdom. There's no question here of unequal authority, no doubt of the creative power in each. And perhaps significantly, there are in this literature alternative visions in which each deity is seen as the single, separate source of creation. As the patron deity of yogis, Shiva expresses masculine creative power as the consequence of tapas, the retention of male seed. He is shown with a great erection, his power accumulated within, and when he ejaculates, the worlds are created. And in a vision of feminine creative power, the goddess is shown seated on a throne in the center of a golden island, in the center of the ocean of infinite life. She is called deliberating Shakti, the one alone who plans the orderly evolution of the universe, gives birth to the endless multiplicity of forms, and animates them all with her energy. A prayer in the Tantrasara calls her cause and mother of the world, the one primordial being, mother of innumerable creatures, creatrix of the very gods, even of Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. These alternative, seemingly contradictory visions manage to coexist in a culture rich in archetypal imagery, along with the vision of dialogue between the two. These, I think, are images of feminine and masculine selfhood, where the source and direction of creative development is found in two separate and complete forms. You see that these two do not need each other. They are each fully expressive of creative power, expressive both in love and in word. Yet they choose one another. And the relationship they form is passionate, frequently stormy, and finally, revelatory of wisdom. I have the hope that contemporary relationships are moving now to such a mutuality and to a wider wisdom on the basis of a later myth than Plato's. This is a bumpy road we're on, but the considerable and growing interest among women in the goddess in all her manifestations, the awakening awareness of men to gods of the earth and the underworld, these suggest to me a movement toward fully realized gender identity. One consequence of this movement is the possibility of deeper and more conscious relationships between men and between women. Our focus on the contrasexual other as the absolute prerequisite to wholeness, has inclined us to derogate same-sex relationships, or at least to minimize their value to us. We have acted as if intense and intimate same-sex relationships must be pathological, or at least a sign of immaturity, though many of us know better, and there is in our myth and literature a prominent strain of recognition for the infinite value of a friend. But we have competed with one another for the prize, the prince or the princess. Inevitably, we have envied or despised the strength or weakness in the other, which we cannot claim in ourselves. We have projected personal shadow and intensely negative or positive parental qualities on same-sex associates, and too often we have not valued these relationships enough to work through the consequent difficulties. We have feared and avoided the complexities of eros between same-sex friends, and thereby have lost much in the way of self-knowledge and self-validation, and much in awareness of eros itself. Yet our strength as gendered beings is grounded in association with those of our own sex, and ultimately in awareness of the gendered self whose gifts we share. So grounded, so empowered, the dance between the genders becomes freer and more intricate, not limited to the patterns laid down by gender persona. We know deeply that there is a difference between Shiva and Shakti, masculine and feminine, but we have not trusted sufficiently to discover the authentic range and power of each. When the full dimensions of gendered identity are owned by both men and women, one gender may avoid the projection of collective and personal shadow on the other. Then a member of either sex may discover and affirm a full and authentic identity, claiming strengths, owning weaknesses, freeing creative energy, and taking responsibility for its consequences. Perhaps we will not then ask of the other that he or she complete us, justify our existence, confer upon us an identity which only the self can empower and direct. Empowered by experience of fully gendered selfhood, we might find ourselves with less to hide, less to envy, freed at last both to personal creative power and to the full and creative eros of tender and passionate dialogue. Thank you. Bring up more, or you can call them, you can give me some from the floor if you have them. The one that I have here is, will this union between the masculine and feminine come about naturally, or what can we do to help it come about? How can we make it come about sooner? We're all eager. Many of the women that I work with in analysis who are struggling toward the realization of, the heretofore called masculine energies toward wholeness, say, yes, but I'll be all alone. And I think men sometimes have the same fear if they permit themselves to really encounter and acknowledge the heretofore considered feminine aspects. What can we do? Well, we can open our minds first. I don't want to overemphasize the importance of ideas, but they really can be quite coercive. Open our minds to the possibility that those attributes which we have considered masculine are not merely masculine. There are gods and goddesses of war, of light, of creative activity, and women that those qualities that we have considered to be feminine may not be just feminine. You see that sometimes it involves giving up those or a reliance on personal powers that we know. Nurturing power is a power, though we may not always want to claim it overtly as such. For women, it's a matter of encountering a double shadow, as Joan Engelsman was saying so eloquently. Because those qualities that of power and assertiveness and creativity that we have grown up thinking of as masculine are not only shadowy for us, but undermine our sense of gender identity. So it's very difficult to proceed that way. So open our minds. That's the first thing. Examine the alternative images. There's a lot being published now about alternative images. Now, you can't just acquire a living image by reading about it, but an awareness of the many alternative images of deity, an openness to a recognition of those in our dreams, can give us the confidence to go ahead with this risky business, can help us to do that. I think it's important for men to more consciously meet one another. I think it's important for women to more consciously meet one another and to find in our associations an added strength for the development of gender identities which are at odds with our culture's definitions. I don't know if that's clear. I could go on in that vein. Are there any other questions? You know, I've been haunted since I heard the Ulanoffs by an image that Anne brought of the woman minister who had this vision of her ministering self in masculine form, confronting an audience, inspiring and leading an audience with his back to her. That feminine child has been taught that her ministering capacities can only appear in that masculine form, and yet they're authentic capacities. I think it's a particularly poignant situation for women in the ministry. To turn behind herself to do this, and to find behind her a feminine source for her voice, is essential. I work also with a minister, woman, who is eloquent, is energetic, is exhausted. And we've discovered a 3-year-old child who has no sense of support and mothering. It's just these bumpy kinds of things. If a man experiences the feminine as the primary power in his life, he too is cut off from his possibilities. You have to feel them as belonging to yourself as a man or a woman, I think. Anything else? No arguments. I guess that's dandy. Huh? Okay, Murray. Right.
It's my sad duty to say a benediction. When we plan these conferences and ask, there is a planning experience that goes on, and we think about various presenters and topics and themes, but we don't coach anybody, and we don't ask them specifically to talk about this or that, and yet the experience inevitably is of a weave that comes together and threads, and a chemistry that happens at the conferences, and one thing reinforces another or balances it. And again, that's happened this time, certainly for me, I hope for many of you as well. And I hope that this experience will have planted some seeds of thought and intuition that you can take from here. And I hope the conference also will have encouraged you to let those seeds grow, that other people are changing and transforming and thinking along lines that you are, and that you're in a group phenomenon. And we hope that you will have also gotten some understanding for how each of your own personal individuation processes, your own transformations and changes and questionings are tied in with others and with a vast cultural transformation and change that's going on in our time, that you aren't alone in this, and that your own personal individual struggles do count and make a difference for the present and the future. So we hope that you get a sense of a collective emerging from all of our personal individual thrashings about and struggles. And finally, I would hope that as we depart from here and each of us goes out into the world and back into our lives, that you will allow your unconscious to address what you've experienced here. Look to your dreams and your fantasies and your intuitions to see how your own unconscious responds to what you've heard here, what this input has been, because that'll take it the next step. And so when we meet again in a year or two, we will have done that and you will have done it, and we will take this whole process one step further. That's a promise. A year or two, I don't know how long, but we will reconvene. And so with that, I can wish you well and hope that you've had a good experience here, and ask you as you leave or sometime before too long that you give us your evaluations, those sheets that you were asked to show your response. Thank you very much.